Now to our cover story tonight. 10 months ago, a quartet of nations, including Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Egypt and Bahrain, accused Qatar of sponsoring terrorism and meddling in their internal affairs. What followed was a diplomatic and economic standoff between the two sides. But now the tension threatens to spill on the region's geography as well. Saudi Arabia has proposed building a canal along the land border it shares with Doha. What it will do is turn an entire country into an island. Let me explain to you how that is going to happen. Saudi Arabia and Qatar, we can tell you, share a 60-kilometer long border. This is the border that the two countries share, and this distance is 60 kilometers. This border is the only link, as you can see, between the Qatar Peninsula, this is the Qatar Peninsula, and the mainland Gulf nations. If Saudi Arabia turns this border along here into a canal, it effectively cuts Qatar off the landmass. And we'll show you how that is going to happen. That's how the proposed Salwa Canal, as it's going to be called, will turn Qatar into an island. Take a look at this. Now, Qatar is an island if this plan goes through. The planned canal stretches from Salwa in the north to Khor al-Adid and Khwar al-Udaid, as it says, along this side of the border. It is expected to be 200 meters wide, 15 to 20 meters deep, much like the man-made Panama and Suez canals. This new moat will be capable of handling ship traffic as well. This will facilitate a seaport, which will be built in Salwa in the north and Aqlat al-Zawayed. Riyadh also plans to develop the coastline as a tourist hub. It has plans for construction of sea-facing resorts in towns like Salwa, Sakak, Khor al-Adid and Ras Abu Khamis. This project is expected to cost something like $750 million. The money will come from the Saudi Arabian government, also from private investors from the United Arab Emirates. The engineering expertise will be Egyptian. They're experienced, you know, they built and now run the Suez Canal. But that is the pretty side of this proposed plan. If this tacit threat was not enough, Saudi Arabia has more in store for Qatar. Riyadh is planning to set up a waste dump for the upcoming Saudi Arabian nuclear reactors. They're also planning a military base near the town of Salwa, somewhere here. The message to Doha is very clear. Mend your ways or face the consequences. A sentiment reflected in the remarks made by the UAE Minister for Foreign Affairs, Anwar Gargash. He took to Twitter to say, and I'm quoting, "The silence of Doha about the announcement of canal project reflects fear and confusion," he said. "The solution is not an arrogant attitude that Qatar cannot afford, but rather in good management, rationalization, wisdom and a review of a disastrous policy that has isolated Qatar and pushed it in an unenviable position." The next obvious question is, how much of this can impact Doha? Qatar, as we know, is an affluent nation. It has managed to elude major economic turbulence even in the face of tough sanctions. So much so that even the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, was forced to observe that the direct economic and financial impact of the diplomatic rift between Qatar and some of these other Gulf countries in the region is fading. Qatar is not feeling the pinch. The land border between Qatar and Saudi Arabia is blocked, meaning there is no movement of supplies to Doha, which has prompted Qatar to strengthen ties with countries like Oman, Iran and Turkey. This keeps a steady inflow of essential commodities into the country. So will the proposed canal hit Doha where it hurts the most? We're not too sure of that. What we can tell you is that the timing of this proposal is interesting. Consider the sequence of events. The Saudi Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, visits the US. He spends 3 weeks in the US. He meets the American president, whose most preposterous election promise was building a wall to block the Mexicans. We'll come to that in a bit. First, let's listen in to what the prince said about his meeting with Donald Trump.
Thank you, Mr. President. Actually, the relation between Saudi Arabia and the rest of America, it's an old relation. We are the oldest ally of the rest of America and the Middle East. Right. More than 80 years of alliance and big interest, politically, economically, and security.
The prince talks of alignment between the two nations, political and social. But clearly, there was another kind of concurrence as well, the idea of isolating neighbors. Who knows? The Crown Prince may have taken a leaf out of Donald Trump's book, but he may want to look at Trump's record as well. The much-hyped wall is actually a fence. Donald Trump said that he will make Mexico pay for it. That's not happening. Neither the Mexican government nor the American Congress has agreed to fund this bizarre plan. But after much back and forth, the Democrats relented. So essentially, the American taxpayer is funding the Donald Trump wall along the Mexican border. $1.6 billion have been sanctioned for some new construction along the border. Conservative estimates say that it will take almost $25 billion to fence the 3,000-kilometer long border with Mexico. But President Trump's position has also been changing, like on all other issues, flip-flops on the wall as well. From the initial proposal of a monolithic wall, which was supposed to be 30 feet high, the plan now calls for a modest 1,000-kilometer-long barrier, which will be a mix of fencing and walls. It seems the American president's grand plans hit a wall. And while the U.S. may be seriously rethinking the feasibility of this wall, Saudi Arabia is planning to make its vision a reality. Experts estimate that the Salwa Canal project will cost a fraction of what America plans, and it will be built within a year. But talking about high-tech borders, few can match the precision and single-mindedness of the Israelis in constructing barriers despite bombs, despite protests, despite international condemnation. The apartheid wall, as it is called, cuts off Palestinian territories from Israeli-occupied regions. Israel says it's a security barrier against Palestinian terrorists. Palestine says it's an attempt at racial segregation. The 700-kilometer-long wall is among the starkest reminders of the lines we draw to divide the world.
During the Cold War, the Berlin Wall became the most notorious symbol of a wall designed to keep citizens inside boundaries. Erected in 1961 with an aim to control mass exodus from the east to the west, the wall managed to divide the city of Berlin into Russian-controlled East Berlin and West Berlin under the Allies. 3 decades later, the East German government decided to allow its citizens into West Berlin. Hundreds flocked to the wall and brought down what was a physical and ideological barrier between the two sides. While this wall was brought down, another one was in the making. The tension between Israel and Palestine manifested in a physical form when Israel decided to build a wall along its border with Palestine. What was proposed by the Israelis to back security is considered a land grab by Palestine, as the line runs not just along the official border between Israel and the West Bank, but in Palestinian territories too.
The city of Bethlehem inside the West Bank is the holiest city for Christianity. And it is here, within this city, that the dividing wall, the wall which divides Palestine and Israel, runs along. On this wall you can see the history of Palestine. You can see a big picture, a big painting of Leila Khaled, one of the symbols of the struggle, of the resistance for the independence of Palestine. But there is also space for someone who is, as of now, definitely not a friend of the Palestinians. We have President Donald Trump of the United States. Remember that recently the United States decided to move their embassy from Tel Aviv to the contested holy city of Jerusalem. These strengthen the claims of Israeli who thinks that Jerusalem is only their capital city. Obviously, Palestinians do share a very different opinion. And again, this wall, once again, is the story of divided interpretation of history. On this side of the wall where we are, in Palestinian territories, they call it the wall of apartheid, but on the other side of the border in Israel, they call it a security, a necessary security measure to protect their citizens and their existence.
But borders along the land are not the only ones that are contested. Take the East China Sea, for example, where the energy-rich islands of Senkaku have been the bone of contention between China and Japan. China claims that the islands were a part of its territory as long back as the 15th century. But Japan contests the claim. It says that it saw no trace of Chinese occupation in 1895 when the islands were incorporated as a part of Japan. In the century-long battle for control, both the nations have deployed ships, frigates and even aircraft to keep each other at bay. In a world of increasing territorial ambitions, borders are being drawn and redrawn every day. and the ones mentioned here are just a fraction of the world's most worrisome border disputes. Bureau Report, WION.
So the United States is doing it, Saudi Arabia is doing it, Israel has already done it, others have tried. What is keeping India from completely isolating its mischievous neighbours, especially Pakistan? Border infiltration remains on the upswing. Pakistan continues to pump terrorists into Indian territory to carry out deadly attacks. Terror launch pads along the line of control in Pakistan continue to thrive. Why shouldn't India then build a wall like the Americans are planning, even a fence? Here's why. First of all, it'll be a colossal exercise. We're talking about making a 3,000-kilometer long stretch impermeable. The India-Pakistan border runs through 4 Indian states. Big ones: Jammu and Kashmir, Punjab, Rajasthan and Gujarat. So you need a concerted political push. The next challenge is the terrain. While the mighty Himalayas separate the 2 nations in Jammu and Kashmir, there's a Thar desert in western Rajasthan that forms a natural partition between India and Pakistan. So that makes it extremely difficult, if not impossible, to erect a wall along this border. So what will India do? Will it do nothing? It has in fact come up with a second best alternative, taking a leaf out of Israel's book. India is now relying on high-end technology to counter infiltration. The results have been mixed. The use of satellite imagery, deployment of CCTV cameras, thermal imagery, equipping forces with night vision devices and using underground monitoring sensors and laser barriers is how India plans to secure its western border. The situation on the eastern end is relatively better, even though the India-Bangladesh border is considered highly porous, the government of India has been mulling a similar arrangement on the eastern side as well. Relations between the border security forces and the Bangladesh border guard are also at an all-time high. Troops on both sides are helping each other check unverified movement of goods and people along the border. So it's getting better. Experts say this is the best bet for India right now. We do hope they're right. Ahead on the show, we'll talk about someone else who's also working on a PR exercise, Mark Zuckerberg, testifying before the US Congress in the data leaks case. What does he face? Has the scandal really dented Facebook? We'll look at the numbers. Pakistan is a resilient international migraine. It squandered the opportunity Indian Prime Minister Modi offered after taking office. Not our words. This is a former Pakistani diplomat, Hussain Haqqani, speaking in an exclusive interview. That's coming up. The Indian Army will finally get 190,000 bulletproof jackets. We tell you why this is a deal riddled with holes. We're discussing borders tonight. Let's dwell on social barriers that hamper the progress of a nation. Caste and religion divide societies. The issue of caste and reservation has yet again stoked violence in India. A week after protests by Dalit groups over the alleged dilution of the caste law, the SC/ST Act as it's called, left 11 people dead. Today, hundreds of young men took to the streets, this time opposing caste-based reservation or quota in education and jobs. At least 12 people have been injured in violent clashes in the state of Bihar. Supporting the Bharat Bandh, or a national strike, the groups blocked roads at several places. They halted trains, forcibly closed markets in many locations in the state of Bihar, including the capital of Patna. Prohibitory orders involving Section 144 of the Indian Penal Code were imposed in Rajasthan's Jaipur and Bharatpur, Madhya Pradesh's Bhopal and Uttarakhand's Nainital. But unlike the protests on the 2nd of April, today's Bharat Bandh, or national strike, failed to garner substantial support, substantial political support especially. The government was caught off guard amid last week's Dalit outrage that went out of control, pushing BJP chief and senior leaders to say that they are pro-Dalit. They are a pro-Dalit party, they claimed, blaming the opposition, saying the opposition is conspiring against the centre and they're instigating violence. With nearly 30 crore of the Indian population belonging to scheduled castes and scheduled tribes and these communities, the Dalit vote is significant in Indian politics. It's a vote bank that every party wants to tap. It appears that political parties are not taking any risks to alienate these groups with the general election just a year away, which is why today's protest, which was a majoritarian view, people from upper castes opposing reservation, did not get any political support. Interestingly, today we also saw Anti-reservation, anti-quota protests in neighbouring Bangladesh. Students at the Dhaka University are continuing their protests for the third day, demanding reforms in the reservation process for recruitment to government jobs. At least 100 students were injured. Many others were detained during clashes with police yesterday. WION's Dhaka Bureau Chief Saad Hamadi sent us this report.
Students have occupied the streets around Dhaka University in protest against a 56% reservation in the government service recruitment. The reservation entitles 30% for descendants of freedom fighters, 10% for women, 10% for backward districts, 5% for ethnic minorities, and 1% for people with special needs.
We girls, we are against this. We don't need special rights. We are equal to men. We are equal to men, and we don't need quota at all.
The government has assured the students on Monday that they would examine the existing quota system and would reveal the outcome within a month.
Those who are participating in the movement, they are now saying that they are not for eradicating quota or eradicating affirmative support for any group, but they want it to be justified, and so they want a reform of this. So I think these demands are justified. Government has recognized it after much pressure.
The protests have entered the third day as many students demand an immediate decision from the government.
Students have gathered here at the Dhaka University demanding an explanation for the attacks that have been carried out on the protesting students in the last couple of days. They have been demanding a reform in the reservation process in the recruitment in public services. 3 days have elapsed and the protest is still going on. The primary demand is that the reservation of 56% be reduced to a tolerable limit for them so that common students have more access and eligibility to enter into government jobs. In Dhaka, at the Dhaka University, Saad Hamadi, WION.
Better safe than sorry, an adage you and I have probably heard often, but the Facebook CEO, Mark Zuckerberg, seems to have adopted a slightly different approach to tough situations. It's more of a better sorry and more sorry style. That's what the number of times he's apologized over the past few days seems to indicate. But to borrow from Justin Bieber, we wonder, is it too late now to say sorry?
Users are upset with Facebook. Over the years, the company has failed to protect their data. And every time the social networking giant is slammed for mishandling personal information, its founder and CEO Mark Zuckerberg issues a fresh apology. He did so again in a written testimony to the American Congress. While we don't know how many apologies Zuckerberg has in store for users and lawmakers, but we definitely have a list of apologies he has issued so far. From the earliest to the most recent, in which he acknowledges mistakes and promises to do better, but to no avail. It was in 2006 when Facebook started aggregating posts from each member's friends into a new feature called Newsfeed. It was not a major privacy issue, but agitated many users. This is how Zuckerberg said sorry, and I quote, "We really messed this one up. When we launched Newsfeed and Minifeed, we were trying to provide you with a stream of information about your social world. We didn't build in the proper privacy controls right away." But just a year later, Facebook irked users yet again. In 2007, Facebook introduced a feature named Beacon that told a user's friends what they just bought, unless they blocked the disclosure of each purchase. It took Facebook several days to recognize it had a problem and quell the outcry. This time, Zuckerberg apologized, saying, "We have made a lot of mistakes building this feature, but we have made even more with how we have handled them. We simply did a bad job with this release and I apologize for it. Instead of acting quickly, we took too long to decide on the right solution. I'm not proud of the way we have handled the situation, and I know we can do better." Then in 2009, Facebook changed its terms of service and its users reacted with suspicion. Zuckerberg knew what would work, a promise to fix, an assurance to do better. He said sorry yet again. We are at an interesting point in the development of the open online world where these issues are being worked out. In 2010, the Wall Street Journal reported its discovery that Facebook allowed advertisers to access unique user IDs which can be used to track consumers. This time, it took the company a month to respond as the outcry from the users and privacy advocates grew. And Zuckerberg said, "Sometimes we move too fast, and after listening to recent concerns, we are responding. In the coming weeks, we'll add privacy controls that are much simpler to use." We will also give you an easy way to turn off all third-party services. We are working hard to make these changes available as soon as is possible. And then it became almost an yearly thing. In 2011, Facebook signed a consent decree with the US Federal Trade Commission after an investigation of its privacy violations, to which Zuckerberg issued another apology. He said, and I quote, "I'm the first to admit that we have made a bunch of mistakes. Recently, the American Federal Trade Commission established agreements with Google and Twitter that are helping to shape new privacy standards for our industry. Today, the FTC announced a similar agreement with Facebook." But Facebook's apology mantra appears to have gone kaput. In the wake of the recent data leak involving Cambridge Analytica, Facebook's apology does little to satisfy lawmakers and its users worldwide. Bureau Report, WION.
By Mark Zuckerberg's own admission, Facebook is more like a government than a multinational company. The Facebook community itself has 2 billion people around the world. The company at large serves many more customers through the other platforms that they own, like WhatsApp and Instagram. Facebook has become so powerful today that it looks like a sovereign state in itself. It has the power to influence the habits, opinions and decisions of its users. Zuckerberg helms affairs at Facebook. He holds the final decision-making power and the buck stops with him. The present setup placed a lot of power in one individual's hands. But is anyone keeping a check on that power? Mark Zuckerberg is the chair, he's the chief executive officer and the controlling shareholder of Facebook. So far, there's been little conversation around the impact social media has on society, the economy, or the politics of a country. But the Cambridge Analytica scandal changed all of that. Since then, Facebook has announced sweeping changes to the platform. Zuckerberg has admitted that mistakes were made. He has apologized, but the Facebook CEO's appearance before lawmakers will be a different ballgame altogether. Zuckerberg is expected to be grilled on Facebook's core business model and how user data is being used to monetize this platform. He's expected to be questioned on Facebook's monetary policy. The company has already felt the impact of the scandal. Since the Cambridge Analytica scandal broke, it's lost more than $50 billion in market capitalization. The market value of its stock has also dropped. The Delete Facebook campaign has gathered steam. Other Facebook platforms like Instagram are also feeling the heat. Mark Zuckerberg has now vowed to keep a close eye on how user data is being shared with developers. We ask, did he not know that before? That's where the dilemma also lies. While Facebook now faces the challenge of winning back the trust of its users, it still depends on the same business model where user activity and data is used to make money, to make this platform viable. Marrying these two is perhaps the biggest challenge facing Mark Zuckerberg right now. Who on earth would want to buy 21 used MiG-29 aircraft? Possibly India. At least that's what the Russians seem to think. Reports say the MiG-29s may help the Indian Air Force fill the shortfall in aircraft numbers. The IAF may not bite, given its own problems with a fleet of MiG-29s. But that may not be the biggest worry for the Indian forces right now. Pakistan has said that it is buying Russian T-90 tanks and Sukhoi 35s, brand new ones. Russia has denied this report as wishful thinking. But this isn't the first time a Pak-Russian military tie-up has been brought up. Our next report looks at the future then of the India-Russia defense relationship.
Russia has reportedly offered India 21 used MiG-29 fighters. The implication is that they can fill the gap in IAF numbers. But the Indian Air Force does not want to add to its 54 MiG-29s acquired since 1986. Their operational availability is low, meaning only 40% of the fleet is ready for use at any point. Perhaps the used MiG-29s can be bought and cannibalized for spares. The larger problem is Russian equipment, which though rugged, requires high levels of maintenance. It seems even the wanted Su-30 MKI fighters tend to spend more time on the ground because of maintenance issues. It explains the decision to buy 36 French Rafale fighters and media speculation about the American F-16 and the Swedish Gripen light fighter. Russia has hit back. It may be opening to sell the Su-35 fighter and T-90 tank. The Su-35 is believed superior to India's Su-30 MKI, while the T-90 tank has been with the Indian Army for the last 18 years. Russian diplomat sources have denied plans to sell such equipment to Pakistan. An official was quoted in Delhi as saying, "This is yet another case of wishful thinking. There has been no discussion about Russian intentions to sell such defense equipment to India's western neighbor." Sources in Moscow told WION over the phone that Russia doubts Pakistan's ability to pay. The sources confirmed that Pakistan had proposed buying an uprated version of the S-300 missile defense system, which could cost around $1 billion. But it's not clear how Pakistan would pay for it. The sources said Russia knows that Pakistan cannot compete with India's deep pockets. But by selling the Su-35 to China along with the technology transfer for its AL-31 Saturn engines, Russia has undercut its strategic partnership with India. It has also sold China the S-400 missile defense system, the very system India is negotiating to buy. The China-Pakistan alliance has put India on the strategic defensive in South Asia. The crisis in the India-Russia military relationship is happening at a time when Moscow is under Western sanctions, while India is diversifying its arms purchases. Make in India is the norm despite doubts about how to achieve it. Russia is seen as reluctant about Make in India when Lockheed and Boeing are hard selling the same. Bureau Report, WION.
Here's another interesting fact. If Pakistan were to spare less than one-fifth of its military budget, it can run a program of universal education, meaning literacy for all, every child at school. Clearly, Islamabad does not intend to do that, more importantly, Rawalpindi. But this is something that many critics are highlighting, including former Pakistani ambassador to the US, Hussain Haqqani. He speaks the truth. He's been highlighting the problems in Pakistan, and he's now being hounded in his own country because he's highlighting these facts. He's turned from an establishment man to a bitter critic of Pakistan. He knows the system in his country. He's been part of it. And so when he speaks, his word carries weight. We spoke to him about India-Pakistan ties. We also asked him why he calls Pakistan a resilient international migraine. Hello and welcome to the interview. With me is a very special guest today, one of Pakistan's most famous diplomats and one of the most prominent critics, would I say, of the current dispensation, Mr. Hussain Haqqani. Let's start with what's happening between India and Pakistan. Would you say that ties are at an all-time low today, with the diplomats being allegedly harassed and things going the way they are? There are no talks.
The misfortune of the misfortune of Pakistan-India relations is that there have been far too many occasions when people have said the relationship is an all-time low. The fact of the matter is that we are now at a rather juvenile phase of the relationship, because when you think that ringing somebody's doorbell at 3 a.m. is the way to advance statecraft, you are not really advancing statecraft. I think India and Pakistan are at a very difficult moment, but not necessarily an all-time low. It can go lower, God forbid. At the end of the day, Pakistan has to take into account India's very genuine concerns about terrorism. And India has to recognize that Pakistan has a lot of difficulties that it is trying to deal with, or maybe not dealing with effectively. So India has to show some patience while Pakistan can reimagine itself, while Pakistan definitely has to act very quickly on the issue of terrorism. And both sides have to recognize that acting like little children in harassing each other as diplomats and not behaving like modern states is not going to advance the relationship.
You say India must show patience. It's been 70 years. Isn't it asking a bit too much of India, given the fact that the man who perpetrated the worst terror attack in India, on Indian soil, is a man who's making a political entry in Pakistan? The fact that cross-border terrorism continues, the fact that some would say the Indian Prime Minister put his best foot forward and Pakistan possibly
you probably know my views on that. I personally feel that Pakistan is shooting itself in the foot by allowing Hafiz Saeed to continue to operate and to give him political space. As far as the question of patience is concerned, India is a 5,000-year civilization and a 5,000-year-old country. 70 years is just a very small blip in India's history. On the other hand, Pakistan is only a 70-year-old country. So while people like me question a lot of Pakistani policies, I also at the same time advise my friends in India that do not get swayed by the daily news cycle the way countries with a short history are much more easily prone to do. There will be an India long after all these little episodes are gone. And so it's important to have the long view rather than look at everything only from the point of view of the daily news cycle.
Would you say that the Indian Prime Minister tried with, with
oh,
the
absolutely,
ceremony and Pakistan did not make the
I hope you are
the
familiar with my views. I do think that in this particular instance, the Indian Prime Minister, and not only the current Prime Minister, but the preceding Prime Minister as well, they have tried very hard. And unfortunately, Pakistan has not been as responsive as it could have been or should have been.
You've also made a point that Pakistan seems to have convinced itself of its indispensability in the war against terror. But over the past 1 year, we've seen some tough statements from America. We've seen aid being cut. Donald Trump is walking the talk, albeit slowly, according to India. But would you say that there is a certain degree of disillusionment now in Rawalpindi?
I think that what Rawalpindi and Islamabad both have to come to terms with is that the world never has endless patience. You pushed me back when I suggested that India needs to have patience, which was a statement in a very specific context of diplomats and how to treat each other in normal intercourse of nations. But the world has trusted Pakistan, mistrusted Pakistan, trusted it again, and then found that the promises are not being kept, especially on the question of dealing with terrorist safe havens. And I think that the United States is no longer willing to trust Pakistan's assurances without verification. But it's not just the United States. In the Financial Action Task Force, a lot of other countries said that Pakistan has given assurances before and not cracked down on terrorist funding. So, and then above all, having jihadi groups in Pakistan is basically inviting trouble for Pakistan. So Pakistan should have acted, and it should have acted in its own interest. The fact that the Pakistani deep state decided that no, this is not our interest is in protecting those people whom the rest of the world considers as terrorists, has placed Pakistan in a position where Pakistan's strategic location and Pakistan's availability as a strategic partner to the world's major powers is not going to be enough for Pakistan to be able to maintain itself the way it has become accustomed to maintaining itself.
United States attacked Russia for contributing to the violence against civilians in Syria. U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations Nikki Haley called for a UN inquiry into the chemical weapons attack. Haley said that the United Nations will respond regardless of whether the U.S. decides to act or not.
Stop this senseless slaughter, if it wanted. But it stands with the Assad regime and supports without any hesitation. What's the point of trying to shame such people? After all, no civilized government would have anything to do with Assad's murderous regime. Pictures of dead children mean little to governments like Russia, who expend their own resources to prop up Assad.
Later, the White House said that Russia has betrayed its obligation to end Syria's chemical weapons program. U.S. President Donald Trump has vowed to take quick action. He cancelled all his engagements so that he can stay in Washington to develop a strategy. President Trump discussed the incident with French President Emmanuel Macron, and both leaders expressed a desire for a firm response.
We're going to make a decision tonight or very shortly thereafter, and you'll be hearing the decision. But we can't let atrocities like we all witnessed, and you can see that, and it's horrible. We can't let that happen. In our world, we can't let that happen. Especially when we're able to, because of the power of the United States, because of the power of our country, we're able to stop it.
Russia responded to the charges with an announcement. The Kremlin said that it will submit a resolution to the Security Council proposing that international inspectors visit the site of chemical weapons attack in Duma. Russia wants independent experts to be convinced that nothing had happened. They're denying that there was any attack. And Russia has vowed to do anything to allow such a visit to take place.
Пригласили экспертов Организации по запрещению химического оружия туда прибыть. И будем добиваться того, чтобы этот визит, эта поездка состоялась. Мы не можем больше брать на веру те результаты, которые получаются по итогам расследования с дистанции.